it is a very worrying situation. It's just the utter recklessness of Western leaders really could get us into World War III. I mean, it's just, because I stopped and think, another thing I think I said on Friday is just said that, okay, what Putin is trying to do is to slap a drunk, just wake him up. He's trying to avoid an all-out fight, but he just needs him to wake up and start, speaking rationally. And I stopped and thought, well, clearly that hasn't worked. Especially the French reaction indicates that it hasn't worked. But then say, well, what if he goes ahead, Putin does, and makes good on his promise to respond to another ATACMS or Storm Shadow or Scalp strike in Russian territory with an equivalent strike on NATO territory? I guess initially I was thinking, well, that'll wake him up, surely. But I don't think it will. I mean, it's just that, partly because within the West, the narrative with virtually no exceptions. Actually, I only saw the first exception, I think, yesterday, and it came from the French paper Le Monde, which you just mentioned. They actually had an article that explained that these Scalp missiles and Storm Shadows and ATACMS need to be programmed, by NATO technicians, and that's the problem. I mean, that's the only Western news story that I am aware of, that makes that point, that acknowledges this crucial point, this bit of information that explains, the alarm within Russia and the very strong statements that Putin has made, and would explain, to Western publics, why NATO is responding. But that's, nobody's going to hear that. That's one small voice and just a cacophony, a sea of voices that do not acknowledge that crucial fact. And so if Russia actually does retaliate, everybody will be utterly shocked. Say, why? This came out of the blue. It was sort of like the SMO. Of course, Russia had been warning, explaining, what the problem was. This is an existential threat, but it was completely ignored with the West. So when Russia launched the SMO in February of 2022, there was no context. And it was just an unwarranted, unjustified, so-called full-scale invasion. And this will be the same thing. So it'll just ratchet things up farther. And we may really, we are on a knife's edge now. If for example, France starts firing scalps into Russia, Russia, I think, will see that they have no choice but to respond in kind. And it could be an attack on NATO territory, or it could be through the Houthis or a proxy. But either, however they do it, it's probably it's not going to sober up the other side. That was my hope. But upon reflection, that's just not what's happening. They're just going to, go shoot up the escalation ladder, and who knows what they're going to do, but it's not going to be good.
So you think that we will immediately just bang the war drums even louder once Russia retaliates? There's no slapping us into sobriety anymore?
That's what I'm afraid of. I mean, just look at everything that's happened so far. I mean, I guess the only thing we can say is that the only it seems to me like sane voices, occasionally sane voices, have been coming from the Pentagon. Like, again, I think the Pentagon's very unhappy with this, with what's happening. I think it's clear that they were fighting this tooth and nail all along, and they were able to hold off the warmongers, the neocons, for a while. But in the end, they have to take their orders from the civilian leadership. And so
this is insanity.
It is.
The crazy thing for me is just that how it seems like most people aren't really aware of the danger. Most people, imagine when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened way back in the day, that was all the news 24/7. But here, just the mainstream media,
people were driving to Canada.
Right, but here it's the opposite. There's no talk about the risk of nuclear war or how terrible something like this could cascade into World War III, and how catastrophic it could be for the entire planet, with potentially Armageddon and ending the planet. It just seems the mainstream media just seems so cavalier
Yeah.
on just, oh, we got to support
Right.
Ukraine no matter what. There are no red lines. We got to teach those
Yeah.
Russians a lesson.
Right.
How do you think this will play out, though? I mean, if it seems like the Europeans and the American people, they don't want to escalate. So
Right.
if they do go up the escalation ladder more and it starts getting more real, well, what's the off ramp? What's our only chance of hope here?
I don't know. I mean, it's in the end, I don't think the people are going to be able to stop it, and the people, unfortunately, are victims of the propaganda. So just as when the the SMO was launched in February 2022, the people were completely uninformed. They didn't know that there had been a civil war that had been ongoing for 8 years already in the Donbass. They didn't know that the Ukrainians were firing artillery shells into Donetsk city and other Donbass cities on a daily basis throughout that time, and it killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. They didn't know any of that. So it just seemed like, what is this? This just came out of the blue. It was unprovoked. So, the leaders could get away with that assertion that this was an unprovoked attack on a freedom-loving country. And so the initial reaction within Western publics was to rally to the Ukrainian side. And there was a lot of, I think, genuine fervor and, in support of Ukraine and anger at Russia. Now, over time, that's died down, and the support really isn't there anymore. But I think we'd see something similar, because this will be portrayed in the same way. This was a completely unprovoked attack. It just came out of the blue. There was nothing, this is the Russians have gone crazy. We got to do something about this. We got to teach them a lesson. And Western publics, because they're so ignorant, they will be convinced of that, and they will at least initially support it. And maybe that initial support is all that the governments need.